my sharing today is based upon that gospel reading from Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, and verses 39 to 49. And we all love someone who has a good sense of humour. And the people of Jesus' day were no different. So often today, we tend to think of Jesus as being a bit serious, maybe even a bit dour in his teaching and his approach. And yet, what Luke shows us is that, like any good teacher, Jesus used a variety of ways and styles to make his point. And here, as Luke records Jesus teaching the crowds, we see Jesus using humour to make the point. And we see these four little cameos which build one upon the other to this crescendo as Jesus drives home the point he's making. And these four little cameos, the first on good and bad teachers, the second on good and bad judgment, the third on good and bad hearts, and the final one on good and bad foundations. And at first glance, we may say that actually none of them are or appear to be what we might term particularly religious. That is, until we get to the last one, and then the penny drops. So what was Jesus saying to the crowd then? And what do his words say to us today? Well, just to take a very quick look at these four little cameo life lessons. And the first takes the form of two very simple questions. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? And our answer today is the same as theirs then. No and yes. And if we think of this, we might think about sort of Charlie Chaplin shows, Morecambe and Wise, The Vicar of Dibley might come to mind. A blind person trying to lead another blind person, and both of them falling into the ditch by the side of the road. And we see how Jesus uses this sort of exaggerated comic image to make a point, to help people to remember the point. And the first point being, be careful who or what you choose to follow or you choose to allow to lead you. For choosing the wrong thing, the wrong person will inevitably find you ending up in the dirt. And today, it's an interesting thought. Who or what do we follow? Who or what do we allow to lead us? If we just look out there is so much and so many today that vie for our attention. And once you step onto social media platforms, that number just increases exponentially. There's TV adverts, friends, marketing, scammers, influencers, politicians. We could go on. Each of them claim to know what we need, promise what we desire, and how quickly we can find ourselves falling in line behind them. But Jesus says, when you're choosing a life guide, choose carefully. Because choosing wrongly can end in disaster. Jesus reminds them and us, if you want to be a good person, if you want to live a good life, then find a good person to follow. And the second little cameo follows on from this. We have no right, says Jesus, in trying to lead others if we ourselves can't see clearly. And we see this second comic image. Why do you always manage to see that tiny, tiny speck of sort in your own. But again, what does this mean? What's Jesus saying to the crowds, to us? Well, Jesus is saying, be careful. Don't be quick to set yourself up as a guide to, as a judge of others. Rather, remember, you who seek to be a guide to your neighbour, you who seek to highlight your neighbour's imperfections, remember, you're not perfect. You don't see as clearly as you might think. If you find yourself tempted to criticize someone, blimey, that person's driving is awful. Look at the way they treat their children. That service, dear me. You get the idea. Before you do that, Jesus says, take a look a little closer to home. Look at your own attitude, actions, reactions. Because if we don't, then we're in danger of opening ourselves to Jesus calling us a hypocrite. So how do we identify good people? How do we ourselves become good or better? Well, we then move into this third sort of comic image of the wrong fruit on the wrong tree. And we see Jesus says, you'll know good people because they do good things. And you'll know bad people because they do bad things. And as we consider both the context of the day and the wider sweep of the New Testament, so we start to see who Jesus' target is. It's those who saw themselves as religious. It's those who saw themselves as right. It's those who then, from that position, criticized others. The Pharisees. For all intent and purpose, the Pharisees outwardly looked like good trees, and yet they bore bad fruit. They tried to take the speck out of the eye of the other, but failed to see the plank in their own. They had, through this overzealous observance of the law, we might describe it, they had developed within themselves what we might term a spiritual pride. They were right, they were better, they were closer to God. And everyone else? Well. And it's now that we start to see these images rolling together, flowing one into the other. They are doubly blind, not only failing to see the road, but also failing to see the plank. Unable to find their own way, yet convinced they're qualified to lead others. And Jesus' target today? And as we ponder this, so the challenge for us, what's your fruit like? Not just outward actions, but more importantly, our inner attitude. Do we say, Lord, Lord, and yet not do what Jesus says? And having laid these first three comic images out, blind guide, huge planks, bad fruit, having got the crowd thinking about how they were living life, viewing themselves, treating others, Jesus then, with this final image of the collapsing house, now drives the point home. If you really want to be a good guide, a fair judge, a good egg, or in this case, a good tree, then you need to not simply listen to, but you need to live out God's word. Otherwise, your life will, in the long run, simply not stand up. And so often when people look at these sort of the house on the rock and the house on the sand, we tend to say, oh, well, it's facing storms in this life. And we might look back over our lives and say, well, we've weathered all those pretty well. But what if we're wrong? What if the ultimate storm is standing before God 1 second after death? Will our house, will my house stand? And so we see through these 4 rather comic images, we see Jesus asks the crowd, he asks us 3 questions, and he presents 1 answer. How do I become a good guide to others? How do I live a self-examined life? How do I ensure that my outward life and inner attitude match up? Those are the 3 questions. And the answer, the only answer, Jesus says, is don't just listen to what I say. Put it into practice.